About 40 years back, I became interested in tracing my family's ancestors. This is how I discovered the Tilly Bend settlement. Situated in the Appalachian Mountains, it really is a beautiful place. The Toccoa River flows down from the high mountains, winding its way into the Blue Ridge Lake. Tilly Bend settlement is nestled back in these same mountains. One must cross the Toccoa River and travel down a one-lane dirt road that takes you deep into the forest. As you drive along, one begins to notice, windows rolled down, how quiet the deep woods become. This was my first impression of this area 40 years ago. This place has been lost in time because it looks like the same now as then, with the exception of the renovation of Tilly Bend Church. I've been here many times over the last 40 years. I suppose you could say I'm drawn to the mystery of this place. I will only share a small portion of my research. However, you need to understand this. Tilly Bend Church sits right in the middle of this haunting. This church is not part of the haunting. This church is the house of God, and services are held here on a regular basis and demands the respect as being the house of God. In 1756, the Creek Indians lived in this area and got along quite well with this white folk that came to this area from North Carolina. There are census records showing that the white man intermarried with the Creek women. The Cherokee did not get along with the Creeks and forced them out of the area. The intermarried Creeks did not leave, and neither did their customs. In 1820, the Stanleys had formed a settlement over the mountain in a place known then as Stanley Gap. This being told, I can now share with you what I know is fact. Searching for my great-great-grandmother's grave, I ended up in Tilly Road Cemetery. At this time, the church only had services on decoration once a year. The church building was very old, but still in fair condition for its age. There were no glass windows, only wooden shutters, and that was common in the days before air conditioning. The doors to this church is what I remember most about this old country church. There was in both of the old doors what appeared to be like someone had shot the doors with a rifle of some sort. My first impression was that someone had done this out of pure meanness. I then proceeded to walk around the side of the church and walked up and peered through one of the cracks between the shutters. Of course, with the shutters closed and there being no windows, the inside was dark. I could, however, make out the old homemade church pews and the pulpit. I also noticed a high ceiling with the rafters showing. Yes, I thought this church is old, and the welcome sign out in front of the church stated the church was established in 1858. After I looked the old church over, I then headed up the hill to the cemetery. I noticed there were a lot of field stones marking the graves, which is not unusual for very old graveyards. Right in the center is a very old and large oak tree, the only tree that is in the graveyard. I started looking around at the grave markers for my great-great-grandmother's grave. Well, to my surprise, her grave was also in the center of the graveyard, and her grave was the only one under the oak tree. The name on her marker is Elizabeth, so I'm looking around at this graveyard, thinking it looked as if no one wanted to be buried anywhere near her grave. I then wrote the information for her marker down, and that is when I noticed the head of her grave was facing west, which is very odd, because all the people here bury the dead facing to the east, because the Lord will return in the eastern sky. I finished getting the information, and I caught a glimpse of someone out of the corner of my eye. I did not hear a car come down the dirt road, and there were no houses close by. I turned very quick to see who it was, and there was no one. I laughed at myself thinking, yeah, I'm jumping at my own shadow. You see, I don't believe in ghosts, but I did believe in mean people. As I started back down the hill, I noticed another grave. It was called Mary. The birthday was the same as Elizabeth. They both died on October 26th. Elizabeth died 1905. Mary died 1906. I thought, boy, somebody messed up on the dates. I reached my car at the foot of the hill, and as I got in, I looked back up towards the cemetery, and at the tree, I saw what appeared to be a woman. Her dress was long and black. She had on a hat that I can only describe as a granny bonnet. I thought, you have got to be kidding. Then it looked as if she stepped back behind the tree. I was curious, so I went about halfway back up the hill and shouted hello. Of course, no answer, so I walked all the way back to the tree, and there was no one there. I hurried back to the car and left. A couple of weeks later, my grandfather asked me if I had went to his great-grandmother's grave. I told him I had, and asked why her grave was facing to the west. My grandfather said, well, she was a witch. I laughed, and I said, really, Grandpa? Why is her grave turned around? He went on to tell me this. She was Creek, and also a witch doctor for the Creek Indians. The whole settlement was afraid of her. Now she had a daughter to marry, a Tilly, and another daughter to marry, a Stanley. There had been a family feud between the Tillys and the Stanleys, so the two sisters became enemies because of their husband. The feud escalated, and on Sunday morning, the Stanleys went to Tilly Church and started shooting through the doors of the church, killing the preacher, he was a Tilly, and several others in the church, including the one sister who married a Tilly. Now, the Tillys didn't let this go, and one night, they went to Stanley Gap and killed some of the men while they were asleep. Now the sister that married a Stanley, her husband was killed that night. A few months later, she died having a baby. Elizabeth Bradley vowed revenge on both the Tillys and the Stanleys for the death of her two daughters. After that, every baby born to the Tillys and Stanleys died at birth. I said, come to think of it, there was a lot of little baby graves, rows of them. My grandpa said, well, after a year of this, the Tillys went to Elizabeth Bradley's house and got her. She was then taken to the center of Tilly graveyard and hung from the old tree. They cut her down and buried her right where she fell. Right before they hung her, she told them she would come back. Now, after a few months, the little baby started dying, all at birth. People in the Tilly settlement started claiming the witch had come back and had taken up residence in a very old and mean woman, Elizabeth Bradley's sister-in-law Mary. So on the anniversary of Elizabeth Bradley's hanging, the men went and got Mary Tilly Bradley. They hung her from the same tree. They would not bury her facing west because she was, after all, not at fault because the witch came back through her and she was a Tilly. I said, Grandpa, that didn't really happen. He said, you saw the graves, and I'm telling you it did happen, and the older folks here will tell you that it's true. He said, and I'll tell you something else that's true. I saw one of them witches one time, when I was a small boy. My grandpa went on to say that when he was about 9 years old, he went to decoration at Tilly, and he described the same very woman that I had seen. This happened 40 years ago, and my grandpa has been long gone for many years now. I've seen a tintype, old picture of Elizabeth Bradley, and I've also seen Elizabeth Bradley at Tillybent. I've kept a record, and I've seen her 8 times in the last 40 years. There has been two occasions that I heard a little baby crying as I walk up the hill. Of course, it quits when I get to the tree. Strange how one would think you could only see a ghost at night. I've only seen her in the daytime. Of course, I don't go there at night, and I never will. I've always believed in paranormal things. I've had many encounters with ghosts, and it's never really bothered me. My daughter was born in 2006. Around the time she was 1.5, we moved into a nice older house. The first night in our new house, we were camping out downstairs because our beds hadn't been unloaded from the truck yet. Around 2 a.m., I was woke up because you could hear the sounds of someone walking around in a room above the kitchen. I just blew it off as an older building and such. I walked upstairs when I continued to find her closet doors open and things scattered around her room like someone had been in the boxes. Again, I just blew it off as my kid brother playing a trick before he left. The next morning we were setting up her room, and I noticed her sitting there, acting like she was playing with someone. It sort of gave me chills, because she was actually talking to someone. I just ignored it, but later, she started mentioning the man. 3 days into living there is when things started happening. Her room has never been warm. I can turn the heater up to 75 degrees. I've bought a space heater. The landlords have came and checked the windows and insulation. Everything's normal. Her closet doors open at random times by themselves. Now at almost 3, she still talks about the man in her room. She's informed me that the man tells her she can do things, be bad, and do things after she's told no. She still sits around and talks to no one. We lived 14 months, with just little things happening all around 2 a.m. Her bedroom door slams shut, and you hear stomping down the stairs. The laundry room doors open and slam shut. The water in the bathtub turns on by itself. But lately, things have become more aggressive and frequent. I decided to decorate her room. I put new curtains up, her new blankets on her bed, and hung clothes in the closet. I walked downstairs, leaving all the lights on, but shutting the closet doors. I was downstairs maybe 5 minutes. As I entered the hallway, I noticed her door closed. Nothing new, but I opened it, and there was this rush of cold air. Again, nothing new. The light was off, and you could feel someone in the room. It was an angry sort of feeling, like someone was glaring at me. I ignored it and turned the light on. The curtains I'd just hung had been ripped off the rod and lay in the middle of her room. Her new blankets and sheets were off her bed, and her closet doors again wide open. My daughter refuses to sleep in her room now, saying the man scares her, that he yells at her. I've placed crosses and went as far as to have my house blessed, and nothing. In the last 2 months, I've been woken up to someone screaming in my ear. The sound of my front door opening and slamming shut, and my bathroom shower turning on, all in the 2 a.m. hour, and on nights my daughter's at grandma's house. There are some stories that my family and friends have passed on, and I think you might find them quite interesting. I'm a great fan of your website. I've some stories that I've heard from family. Here's one that my grandpa encountered. His father had recently died in 1993, and the night of his funeral, he was awoke by something. He didn't know what it was. He was just awoken by whatever it was. He looked over, and his father was standing there, saying, "I'm okay. Please do not worry." My grandpa got a drink of water, and his father left. He went right through the door. Then, I have one from family friends. This was when friends Steve and Rita had moved into a new house. They had seen several apparitions that they have not really explained, but really just blobs. Then, here comes the scary part. Here are two stories that I've also inquired from the same person. Rita and her husband and two friends were in the family room in the middle of the day, talking, and all four of them saw a shadow jump from the balcony, slide across the family room, and go under the couch. Steps have also creaked, and toilets have flushed for no apparent reason. This was also a new house, with no history of violence on the property. Now for the second story. A couple of nights later, Rita was sleeping and woke up to feeling like someone was sitting on top of her, trying to choke her. Steve woke up to Rita's screams and flipped the lights on. She told him there was a man with a plaid shirt in the room, trying to choke her. No one was in the room. She got up out of bed and went to the dresser, looked in the mirror, and he was behind her. A lumberjack-looking man in a plaid shirt standing right behind her. This also might sound kinda weird, but my mother Bernadette lived in a new neighborhood when she was little. Outside of the development was a field with a very small house, almost a shed. Whenever my mom took a walk with her grandma, a little girl would come running out of the house and shed and talk with them. She was always dressed old-fashioned with a dress on. She resembled a little girl like Shirley Temple. She said her name was Judy. My mom saw her several times. Her grandma also did too. Years later, when she mentioned Judy to her mother said that nobody had ever lived in that house. It was used for storage, a shed, and said my mother was making it up, and that it was a story. We have never figured out if it was a ghost or not. My great-grandmother remembered her too. As a side note, I've passed this particular field many times, and have seen the shed, but have not had any strange things happen to me when passing the area. Like my grandmother has said, no one has ever lived in that shed, so I don't know. My name is Rodney, and I would like to share a story with you that happened to me and a friend of mine. First, I'll give you some background. It's the early 70s in Enon, Ohio. My friend Mike and I were very close because both of our parents had gotten divorced around the same time we were in our early teens. We shared similar interests in magic and trickery in the occult. We used to save our money and either buy magic tricks from magazines or make magic tricks and plans that we would buy for our act. We appeared on a local after-school show for kids a couple of times, and in doing so, we got to meet a local famous person named Dr. Creep. He had a Saturday night show where he would host and show scary movies, and he also did magic. Dr. Creep was really knowledgeable and had a lot of contacts. He told us of a local magic shop in Dayton and gave us directions. We couldn't drive at the time, but I would beg my older sisters to take us there. Discovering that magic store opened us up to a whole vast world of new tricks and illusions. The shop also sold paraphernalia for smoking, and it had a lot of what we now refer to as goth type of clothing and jewelry. Well, as we were getting a bit older, the movie The Exorcist came out, and we thought that what a neat idea it was to put some drama and stage production into the act to make it more of a show. We both attended a vocational school, so there were a lot of talented people there, and we found a couple of girls that liked to dance. We added dancing demon girls to the beginning of the show using blacklights, dark jumpsuits to conceal the girls under the sheets. The music was Mike's Oldfield's Hurst Ridge. I think that was the title. The stage was very barren when the show started. Only a small table with dimly lit candle and the dancing girls could be seen. The dancing girls' dance ended with them meeting in front of the table, and big flash exploded, and as the lights slowly illuminated, they would reveal a transformation in the whole look of the stage. There was now a 10 by 12 painted dragon silk tapestry hanging beyond the table, and 2 silk banners of Beelzebub artistically lit with airy lighting, and I would be standing where the dancing girls had disappeared in my cape. Most of our tricks and illusions were dark in nature. My friend Mike moved to Houston a year before we graduated high school. He got a job at the Galleria Mall in the fun shop. After I graduated, I moved to Houston and stayed with Mike at his mother's house. I also got a job at the fun shop. Eventually, we pretty much ran the place, and again, we found a lot of new outlets for magic and the occult. Eventually, we moved into an apartment together as roommates. Our interest in the occult grew, but only out of curiosity, and it gave us an air of mystery to other people. As we made more friends, and our reputations as being a little different spread, we decided to really mess with people. Mike's bedroom had a huge closet, and being young, he didn't have a lot to put in there. We decided to dress it up and make it look like a devil worship, after with the banners we had, and with the skull-shaped candles and the magic tricks. Our plans were when our friends would come over, we would show them that, and they would freak out. The very night we did this at about 12, I awoke to a pounding on a wall between Mike's room and my room. I sat up and yelled, "What are you doing over there?" The pounding continued unrelentingly. I got out of bed and went over to the wall and yelled, "Knock it off, I'm trying to sleep." The knocking got louder and didn't show any signs of stopping, so I went over to Mike's bedroom door and knocked and said, "Mike, stop it." The pounding continued, so I opened the door to see Mike sitting up in his bed, looking at the closet. My eyes went across the room towards the closet, and as my vision passed his dresser, I saw the door slowly closing. I asked Mike what he was doing banging on my wall. He said it wasn't coming from the wall between our rooms. It was coming from the closet. I continued looking onto the closet. As I saw the door, it was breathing and jostling, as if someone was trying to get out. Then it stopped suddenly. We were scared witless. We gathered up enough courage to both walk over, and we pulled open the door with ease. The closet was freezing. We looked around and saw no one or anything. The apartment we lived in was brand new. No one lived next door. Our neighbor downstairs was gone for the weekend. We asked the people behind us the next day why they were banging on the walls, and they said that they hadn't, and that they didn't hear anything the night before. We immediately started ripping all the decorations down. I'm still very much fascinated with the paranormal, but I will not invite it in. I have another story I will share with you later, but as for now, I hope you enjoyed what I gave you. My parents own a lake house in northern Indiana, and we used to have a neighbor named Mr. Campbell. Sadly, Mr. Campbell was quite old and depressed, and one day he left a note and enough food and water to last his dogs at least a week. He said his body could be found in the lake. I couldn't remember if it was ever found though. This story has many parts, all leading to the same conclusion. Mr. Campbell's ghost haunts this property, but he seems to be quite calm and docile. The first instance, well, a rich man, Richard, bought his property, tore the home down, and built a $2.5 million house. Richard was extremely nice and was always coming over for dinner. One day, he told us that he thought his house was haunted. He had an entertainment system installed that requires him to climb a ladder to fully turn it on or off. For that reason, he always left it on and left the ladder in the garage. One day he had guests over and was going to put on the Indy 500, but the system was powered down. He said he watched TV the night before and no one had been in the house. At first he just assumed it was a power outage or something. He got the ladder and turned on the system. However, all of the settings were messed up. The volume was turned down very low and the radio was on and set to a 50s station. The TV was off because of the radio. When he turned on the TV, it was tuned static rather than the Discovery Channel Richard had been watching the night before. He said he played it off as an accident to his guests, but that it kinda spooked him. Later, after this happened, again Richard assumed Mr. Campbell wanted to listen to music, but didn't want to disturb anyone, because no one had heard the music. Richard also had a roommate named James. The thought is that they were lovers, but no one really asked. Richard would travel to Chicago a lot, and James would be home alone. One night, my sister and I were watching TV in our room and saw lights shining outside and heard men talking. We looked out our window and saw about 3 police cars and about 6 policemen walking all over the house, looking at windows and knocking on the door. We went outside with our dad to see what was going on, and the police asked if we had heard or seen anything suspicious. We said no. Why? They told us someone had called 911 from the house, but only breathed into the phone for a couple minutes and then hung up. We told the police that Richard was gone, and usually when he was gone, James would visit his mother down the street. My dad called James' cell, and he was at his mom's for a dinner and a movie. He said he was planning on leaving soon anyways, and came to talk to the police. James let him in, and they searched the whole house, but no one was there. However, in the kitchen, a burner was left on high. James said he made pasta to bring to his mom's and must have forgotten to turn off the burner. After the police left, James said he sometimes got a strange feeling in the house, like he wasn't alone when he knew he was, but that he never got scared. It was more like being watched over than stalked. My sister and her friend were sitting on our screened-in porch one Friday night after we got to the lake house late. They saw a man walk from the pier to Richard's house, and my sister called out, "Hi, Richard," or James, whoever it is. But the figure didn't stop or reply. He just walked up to the house and disappeared. The girl said a light never came on, and he never heard a door open. The next day, Richard was doing yard work, and my sister mentioned the night before and jokingly accused him of ignoring her. He told her he had not been home last night, and that he had just gotten back from Chicago early that morning. He also said that James was in North Carolina for the week for his sister's wedding. My sister and her friends were confused because they had both seen the man and they were worried they had seen a robber. Richard asked if the outdoor lights turned on, and they said no. Why? He said he has motion detector lights, so if there was a person by the house, the floodlight should have come on, and his alarm didn't register entry last night. The next incident, Richard had to move to Chicago. It had gotten to be too much for him to constantly be driving back and forth, so he bought a flat in Chicago and put the house up for sale. James left too. The new owners were really quite annoying and full of themselves, so no one ever told him about the possible haunting or the house's past. One day Janet came over and asked us if the house had a story. I asked why. She said she had been in the shower When she saw an old man staring at her, she screamed and he just disappeared. We told her about Mr. Campbell and everything, and she sort of freaked out. They tried to sell the house, but couldn't. She still says the old man watches her every now and then. The housekeeper says she has never seen the old man while she was showering, but that she thought she saw him one day while she was cleaning. He was in the entertainment room, listening to music. She also said that the 5 dogs will stare at all the same spot for several minutes on end, tails wagging, as if they were being talked to. We still talk to Richard, and he has told us many stories about the house, rearranged pantries, the entertainment system being changed multiple times, and other various things. We think Mr. Campbell haunts the home because he can't move on. My mom says my experience must have been Mr. Campbell trying to get away from Janet for a while. That incident was before the shower, but Janet was already in the home with her husband. We still hear the beeping every once in a while, and we all just say, "Hi, Mr. Campbell, you can visit as long as you like." The dog stops staring and following him after about the 10th time. They'll look up just after the beeping, and just before we hear him leave. I'm a bit of a baby, so I still get creeped out when I'm alone at night, even though I know he has never done any harm. My parents are the last people I think would believe it, but with so many incidents, we think he is there living out his days watching others. Maybe he regretted saying goodbye prematurely, and because of this is what keeps him from going to the other side. I was visiting my mother and some friends in Florida, and stayed with my mother while vacationing, to cook costs of course. She works nights at the local hospital, so I'm there alone from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. when she works. It was a Friday evening, and my mom had just left for work. I was hungry, so I went out to grab a bite to eat. I got back to the house around 8 and called my friend, who was supposed to come over to keep me company, but he was running a little late. So I decided to keep myself entertained as I waited. I was in my room listening to music and stuffing my face when I heard what sounded like church bells. Now, these bells would have had to be kind of loud because I listened to my music on blast. I turned down my radio to hear the sound more clearly, all the while thinking to myself, there are no churches in the area that I know of, which made this all the more strange. As I listened, I heard the sound fade off into the distance, as if traveling away. I sat for a couple of minutes and turned my music back up and continued eating. About 15 minutes later, I heard something like someone trying to get in through the back door. My mom's house is a little older. I'd say about 40 to 50 years old. For someone to pry open the back door would not be a difficult task. So naturally, I ran to the back door to see what was going on. Once there, I saw that no one was there, but the glass in the door near the knob was fogged up like cold water would do in a glass cup. Thinking that was a little strange, I grabbed the handle to open the door, and I let the scream bloody murder. The handle on that door was sub-zero cold, and it really caught me by surprise, just from how incredibly cold it was. I stepped out into the porch, turned on the light, looked around a bit for anything suspicious, and when I saw nothing, I reluctantly went back inside. Concerned, I kept my music to a minimum, just in case anything else happened, as it surely did. About an hour later, I got a call from my friend. Now this is strange. He lives about 5 minutes from my house driving, and about 20 minutes walking. Apparently, he came over to the house and rang the doorbell, heard my music playing, and figured that when I didn't answer, I was in the bathroom or something. He called my phone, but it kept getting cut off after the first ring, so he decided to go back home and come back since it's not far at all. He claims that as he was backing out of my driveway, he saw the front door open. He rolled down the window to see if it was me. He said as soon as he got the window all the way down, the front door violently slammed shut, so hard that my friend thought for sure that the front window should have shattered. I heard none of this. Around the time that he came over was coincidentally the same time I heard the strange bells. So, I was a little spooked and told him to come over. So he said give him about 15 minutes and he would be over. Well, a lot can happen in 15 minutes. I got off the phone with him and went to the bathroom to freshen up a bit. I washed my hands and face and dried them. I was heading back to my room when I heard a faint sound in the living room. I was a little apprehensive to see what was making the sound and started thinking that perhaps I wasn't alone in my mother's house. From my bathroom to the living room, there is a long hallway. As I walked the hallway, I sensed a presence, and it felt like a large presence, however that feels. Upon entering the living room, I looked up and saw what looked like a clergyman. I could see him clear as anything. My reaction wasn't what one would expect. Looking back on the incident, it seems unusual to me as well. I began to cry, almost uncontrollably, and I still have no reason as to why. That's when I heard a knock at my door. My friend had arrived, and as I stood there, I saw the apparition seem to fade to nothing as he continued to knock and rang the doorbell. I opened the door to my friend, who seemed a little shaken himself. He asked me why I'd been crying, and unsure on what to tell him, I simply said that I saw something sad on TV. He asked if anyone else was in the house because he saw someone leave out the back door. I told him it was my neighbor. I've had many things happen to me. Dreams and visions have been a part of my life for as far back as I can remember, but none of them compare to this incident. Weird, huh? I was only about 3 years old when I first started seeing things in my old house. It started with the noises in the attic. I would hear a rocking chair rocking in the attic directly above my bed. However, that portion of the attic had nothing in it at all. The floor wouldn't even have supported the weight. My old house was a 1950s home. The basement still had an old coal room. However, the coal chute was sealed shut to prevent breaking in. The coal room was directly below my bedroom and was the only part of the house no one ever went into. I can only ever recall even seeing the door open once. It was an empty, depressing kind of room. In addition to the noises above, I would sometimes hear footsteps in that old room below me, or footsteps on the basement stairs. The first time I ever saw anything was, as I said, when I was around 3 years old. I woke up from my sleep in the middle of the night to see a young girl standing by my bed. She had brown hair and green eyes and wore a 19th century style green nightgown. She looked to be about 8 years old. She frightened me at first, but I didn't get malicious feelings from her, and gradually I accepted her. She appeared to me often throughout my childhood, and even now I see her occasionally. The other ghost I saw was much scarier. I wasn't the first one to see him. My younger brother was. He was a tall man who held a knife in one hand and wore black. My brother began seeing him when he was about 5 years old. The man would appear in his closet, began to walk towards him, and then my brother in his fear would scream, and the man would disappear when my parents came running. I've never told anyone about my experiences with ghosts, for I was afraid I would be called crazy. But my brother told us all about what he saw. He saw the man a total of 4 times, once in each of our bedrooms, and twice in mine. I saw the man twice, but I didn't begin seeing him until I was much older, around 9 years old. I always got a fairly bad feeling from the man, and Victoria, the name I gave the little girl, would always disappear before he appeared. I got the sense that she was scared of him for some reason. In addition to this, when my great-grandma passed away, I inherited her jewelry box. The first night I had it, I'd left it sitting open on my bedroom floor. When I went to bed, I was around 6 years old. I was lying awake in bed when suddenly the movie in my VCR fell out of the VCR and onto the floor. A few minutes later, my TV turned on. There was no one else in the room at the time. As I got up to turn it off, it turned itself off. A few nights later, I'd once again been playing with the jewelry in the jewelry box. I awoke to find my basketball bouncing itself repeatedly against my dresser, sideways. There was no one else in my room at the time, and it kept it up for over a minute. After that, I became frightened and stowed the box away in the back of my closet. To this day, I will not open it, even though I'm now 16. The scariest thing of all happened when I was 11. I awoke in the middle of the night, unable to move the lower half of my legs. Terrified, I sat up to see a strange black shadow sitting on my feet. It was blurry. That may have been partly because my glasses were sitting on my bedside table. At first I thought it was my black cat, but quickly realized that it was much too big. It was transparent. It was about half the size of a small child. But the thing itself isn't what scared me. It's the feeling that I got from it. I felt terrified, like I've never felt before in my life, as if the strange shadow was pure evil. I struggled to move my legs, and then ran into my parents' room and woke them up. It's the only time I've ever told them of my paranormal happenings. My dad came into my room and turned my light on, but of course, the thing was gone. He insisted I was dreaming and tried to get me to go back to sleep, but I slept on the floor for a week straight after that. I've since moved into a new house. My grandma died here, and we moved in afterwards. Because she left it and everything else of hers to us, I don't have as many experiences here. But there is one that really stands out in my mind. I awoke in the middle of the night, and I could feel someone laying against my back, their knees curled under mine, and their arm around me. I freaked out and literally jumped onto my floorboard and flicked my light on, but nothing was there. My mom was woke up from the commotion, and I told her about it. She told me it was my grandma who was keeping me safe as I slept. And then a few days later, we drove to the cemetery where my grandma is buried. We took my grandma's dog with us. Once we got to my grandma's grave, the dog went crazy. She began to bark and whine and paw the windows frantically. We thought it must have been a squirrel or something, but there were no animals in sight, not even a bird. My mom thinks that the dog saw something we couldn't, and I have to say I agree. I've had many experiences, and these are just the ones I was reminded of by reading other stories on your website. I wrote a lot. I tried to narrow it down a bit. I've tried seances and things with my very good friend who has similar experiences to mine, and we've been successful at this. It really shocks me sometimes, because we'll both get an image in our head or see something, and we can finish each other's sentences. That's how precisely we see things. I definitely believe in the paranormal, and I hope to show other people the truth. I lived in this area for over 30 years. Robinson Woods is the home of the Chief Chichi Pinque, as it is spelled on the sign, in the site of his burial marker. He was the last chief of the Potawatomi Indians, and he was related to the Robinson family. He died in 1953. There have been numerous ghost hunting expeditions conducted here, with reports of drums and shadowy forms of an Indian in pictures in the woods surrounding the memorial marker. These woods are connected to Catherine Woods, west of East River Road, south of the Kennedy Expressway. There's a trail that leads from behind the Chief's memorial marker, going to a small branch of the Des Plaines River. It is along this river that John Wayne Gacy buried several of his victims. Additionally, there have been numerous bodies found here over the years. In the late 1950s, 2 brothers went missing and were killed, and their bodies were discovered here. The area of these woods, more towards the Catherine Woods side, just south of the expressway, is where the American Airlines flight went down, killing all on board. On the east side of the East River Road, there used to be a horseback riding stable called Happy Day Stables, which was the site of many illicit doings. John Wayne Gacy was known to be friends with one of the stable hands that worked there in the 50s and 60s, and he was a frequent visitor there. This stable hand is the one who was responsible for killing the 2 brothers in the late 1950s, and it's local legend that Gacy participated in the murders. Of course, both Gacy and the other man died without ever revealing the truth of this. These woods have been the site of more phenomenon than can be counted. Generations of kids have gone there to dare each other to face their fears. I personally experienced the drums in the woods, the face of an Indian behind the marker, felt overwhelming fear, anger and sadness, and evil along the river behind the trail, and horrifying fear around the airplane crash site. That's my story, and many others, and the rumors surrounding this area. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived in Norwalk, California, with my mom and my soon-to-be stepfather in a 2-bedroom apartment. There are 2 things I remember most about living in that apartment. One was the beautiful Princess Canopy bed I slept in, and the other was the floating woman's head I would see coming into my bedroom from the hallway. I have and will never forget that image. It looked like an older woman with long, coarse gray messed up hair with some kind of hat. The first thing I think of when I remember her face was she looked like a witch, pointy nose, moles on her face. From the moment I started seeing her float in, she just stared directly at me, went around the poles of my bed, and coming right at me. I would always put the covers over my head knowing she was right on top of me, and shut my eyes hard, and put my fingers in my ears until I felt ready to look again. I've always believed and been interested in paranormal and ghost stories. After my grandmother died, I felt her hand on my shoulder in my then boyfriend's house. I turned around. Nobody was there, but for some reason, I knew it was her, and I didn't feel scared. I felt she was letting me know she's okay and with me. Lately, my sister and I have been looking at paranormal sites and researching videos and pictures of ghosts, paranormal stories. Your site is my favorite right now. A few years back, I was at the White Horse Bar in Maloa and was doing a gig. When I was done, I left the back room and walked through the kitchen area, passed by a guy in a white outfit who was preparing food, or so I thought. I put my stuff out of my vehicle, came back in, and was going to get a bite to eat. I asked for a menu, and a barmaid gave me one. I ordered food, and the barmaid headed back to make me my food. After a while, she came back with my food. Her and I talked, and we started dating shortly after that. Well, a week or so later, I met the whole crew, 3 girls, and the owner. I asked where the chef was, and the owner told me they're right here. I laughed and said, "What about the guy?" They all gave me a funny look and said there is no guy. I had explained the guy I'd seen a week back that appeared to be a cook, dressed in white clothing that's similar to a chef, and was facing the kitchen stove that I walked by. They all gave me a weird look, and from there, the owner talked about seeing shadows going across the back room area late at night, and no one was there. He told me the owner prior said a ghostly head was said to appear down from above the bar one time in the past. There was a time that I had to change the light bulb, and it had to be replaced. The old one was loose and burned out. I tightened the new one in place and tightened down the fixture, and we were sitting down my girl at the time, and the owner and another of the bar ladies and I joked, the ghost will probably be here to flicker the lights, and the light will burn out. The crazy thing is, a couple seconds after that, the light flickered and went out. The owner got another light bulb, and I took the fixture enclosure off to find the bulb loose, but still good. One of the barmaids researched the property and told us the place a long time ago, back in the past, was a feed store, and that a guy in his teens got crushed to death from fallen feed sacks. I was born in Singapore in 1951 to British and Australian parents. We lived in various cities in Malaysia during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. In 1957, we arrived in Kuala Lumpur, where we stayed until mid-1975. We moved into a company-owned house at Freeman Road, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The history of the house is as follows. It and the house next door, number 17, were built just before World War II by the late Dato Gunlay Take, a then well-known architect, who became an early Malaysian High Commissioner to either Australia or Canada. He built them for his daughters. During World War II, the 2 houses, along with a large semi-detached house immediately behind, on what was then known as Gulfview Road, were taken over by the Japanese Army's secret police and known as the Kenta Pai, equivalent of the Nazi Gestapo. The 2 houses behind were used as Kampai Thai offices, and the 3 in Jalan Freeman became senior military officers' brothels. The women in the brothels were both Asian and European, the latter being drawn from a pool of captured civilians and military nurses. Comfort women was the term used by the Japanese. Male military POWs were used as gardeners and cooks, etc. These staff, if they fell from favor, were executed, and some were obviously buried in the ground surrounding the houses, as some years later, we did find scattered human remains when excavating the gardens for our new orchid beds. On the advice of our doctor, who identified them as human in origin, we quietly reburied the remains. He said that if word got out as to what we had found, we would never get any Malay or Chinese domestic staff to work for us. After the war, the houses were returned to their owners who, knowing what the Japanese had used them for, promptly put them up for sale. They were all bought by large companies at bargain prices, who used them to house senior expatriate staff. Gunlay Take was no different, and in 1947, sold his 2 houses to the company my father worked for. The 2 company houses were 3-bedroom houses of 2 stories, double brick construction. There was also a long narrow room, forming a roof over the carport at the front door. This room was to play a significant role in what we were to experience over the following 10 years. In our house, this room was turned into a large walk-in linen press and storage area. To enter it, one would take 1 step down. When we moved into the house in early 1957, the first thing my mother noticed was that this room was extremely cold, as if it was air-conditioned. In tropical Malaysia, a non-air-conditioned room this cold is not even practical. Our dogs would never go into this room, and when passing the entrance to that room, always hurried past with tails between their legs. Nobody would really stay in that room for very long. It had a very uncomfortable atmosphere. However, sometimes after running around and playing and getting very hot, I would go and sit on the step at the entrance to the room to cool off. I was 5 years old and knew nothing about ghosts at this time. The main bedroom, on the extreme right-hand side of the upstairs part of the house, as one faced out towards the main road, had its own full bathroom, and the other 2, also upstairs, shared a bathroom via separate doors leading from the bedrooms to the bathroom. These latter 2 were adjoining each other. One was on the extreme left-hand side of the house, and the other at the back, with windows looking out over the back lawn. This eventually became my room. All the doors were heavy solid, with solid brass latches. Windows were hinge teak framed and had a bamboo awning type blind that rolled down over the window to give shade from the sun. Downstairs was a separate formal dining room, lounge room, kitchen, toilet, and downstairs storage room, as well as a storage area under the staircase. The lounge room opened up onto a rear veranda area. Remember, the temperature was over 85 degrees Fahrenheit plus all year round. As per usual, European expatriate practices of the times in India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong expats had domestic servants to look after the household chores. All expat houses built prior to the early 1960s had separate servants' quarters on the property. This house had a 3-roomed building with shared kitchen and bathroom, and it had a car garage building sited at the rear of the property, about 20 meters from the main house. About 3 months after we moved in, funny things started to happen. The first incident was the appearance of a white cat. Interestingly enough, it always followed the last person who went into my parents' bedroom at night, the bedroom at the right-hand side of the house. This cat made no sound, but appeared from nowhere and scuttled into the room as the door was opened. This bedroom was air-conditioned. A thorough search of the room failed to find the cat, but next night, there it was, entering again. At the time, we had no cats. This cat was seen every night until my parents moved to the middle bedroom, which was nearer to the room that my younger sister and I shared. Their old bedroom was then turned into a guest room. Over the years, visiting guests who stayed overnight with us also saw this cat. One evening, about dusk, my mother, looking through the lounge window, witnessed a woman with long red hair, wearing a sort of white nightgown, standing near the front gate. thought that this was unusual and walked out the front door to go talk to the woman. As she walked across the lawn, the woman walked away and went behind the hedge, which formed our front fence. When my mother got to the gate, she looked in the direction that the woman had walked and saw nothing. 3 nights later, my father saw the same woman walk into the entrance of the servants' quarters. He followed her, but found no sign of her when he entered the building. She was never actually seen in our house, only on the front and back lawn and in the servants' quarters, but she was regularly seen in the house next door, number 13, and also in one of the houses behind. The occupants of both these latter houses often saw her sitting on the edge of the bed brushing her hair, but there was never a reflection in the mirror. When spoken to, she would turn her head, smile, and slowly fade from view. We also saw an emaciated man in a military uniform. He was seen in our house, both upstairs and downstairs, as well as outside. One evening, my mother saw what appeared to be a body lying under a shroud in the front garden. About 8 years later, I also saw this figure, for lack of a better word, on the back lawn at first light one morning, and again at about 3 a.m. on another morning. From time to time, we would also see an old Chinese woman in the lounge room. She was wearing a white starched linen top with black pajama pants, cut in a traditional Chinese style. This used to be the standard Chinese domestic staff uniform in the immediate pre- and post-World War II era. We referred to them as black and whites. By the 1960s, the next generation of Chinese female domestic staff had abandoned this tradition for more colorful pajama suit type clothing. One would look up from reading a paper or a book and see this old woman standing in front of you smiling. She would then fade quickly from view. She was only seen in the lounge, in broad daylight, but never when there were a lot of people around. One evening when in my mid-teens, I arrived home from visiting a friend. As I walked down the drive, I noticed that the lounge room was lit up and a man with shiny, neatly combed black hair and wearing a khaki uniform was sitting in a chair with his back to the window and reading what appeared to be a newspaper. I got the impression that he was Asian and thought he was a friend of my father come to visit. Later, I recollected that the furniture in the room was different to what we had in there. When I entered, I found the whole house, including the lounge, to be in darkness, the rest of the family having gone out and the servants retired for the night. Thinking back, I think this man was probably a Japanese military officer. I only experienced this once, and my parents never did. Occasionally we would also hear a woman's voice calling out in terror. We couldn't figure out what she was saying, because she was saying it in Japanese. It was then that my parents realized that what we had seen and experienced were most likely the spirits of those who suffered there. After finding this out, we began to suspect that the cold room I described earlier in this narrative may have been used as a place for the ill treatment and execution of prisoners. My father learned that after the war, health authorities advised that the original septic tank was too close to the house and a new one had to be installed. While digging the new pit, workers had dug up human remains. We left the house in 1967 to move to a new house nearby. The next occupant, also working for the same company, also experienced funny things, but didn't actually see anything strange. This family's dog on several occasions also dug up human bones from the gardens. In the interest of preserving the local peace, they also quietly reburied the remains and said nothing. I didn't find out about what they experienced until many years after they had left Malaysia and returned to England. The company sold the houses in the mid-1970s after my family had left Malaysia. The houses at 15 and 17 were torn down, and a large mansion was built across the boundaries of both properties. However, this was demolished after a few years, and since then, the 2 blocks have remained vacant. In 2008, they are still vacant. This is a prime land in an inner suburban area, but the land is still vacant. The house at number 13 is still standing, but is abandoned and half the roof is collapsed. We wonder just what was found when the site was excavated for the new building. Also, the reason why the new mansion was also demolished and the blocks left vacant. Maybe the souls of those poor victims still occupy the site and are not at rest and reappeared in the new building. I was shocked to see that in Lovejoy, Georgia, there were apparitions. I too had an experience, but didn't think much about it, especially after everybody looked at us. My mother-in-law also saw it, as if we were crazy. We used to live in a new apartment complex. One day, I was sitting on the counter eating lunch, and my mother-in-law was in the living room. As she came towards me to get to the kitchen, we both saw a man going towards the room at the end of the hall. Our first instinct was that one had broken into the apartment. We did get a chill, but at the same time, we didn't seem it was a big deal. We just figured it was the fact that we had gotten scared. I grabbed the phone and we walked towards the hallway. When we looked, we saw nobody. We thought they had gone into the bathroom or the laundry room. When we saw nobody, we looked in the closet of the room, but again, didn't see anybody. After we came to our senses, we realized that nobody could have entered because we would have heard the door and the alarm would have went off anyway. 2 guys that slept in that room told us afterwards that they would have trouble sleeping for a long time. On occasion, they would hear the water running, but they thought it was the other one. After sharing these experiences, we have come to the conclusion that this was in fact paranormal. We called the leasing office and asked them if anything had happened in that apartment, or if they knew of anything of this nature in that area. They obviously thought we were crazy and replied that they didn't know anything. Now that I have found this, I feel relieved that now, thanks to this, my family believes us. I'm of course referring to your site. Thank you for letting me share my story. There's a lot of things in my life I've seen over the years, but nothing has disturbed me quite like this. It was the weekend of break for myself and my mom, and we decided to go up to Oklahoma City to see my cousins. Everything was great. I got to see some relatives, and nothing seemed quite out of the normal. That is as far as normal went that night. While taking the 4-hour drive back, I noticed that the moon was very huge and blood red. Of course, I didn't know about the eclipse that day, so it was cool to watch as we drove to Ferris, which is a tiny town between Lane and Antlers. I remember that my mother pulled into the Veterans Bridge in Aloka when a couple miles down the road, I happened to look up, and an elderly couple was standing on the side of the road, staring across as if watching something. It reminded me of the Grant Wood painting of the farmer. I remember looking at a clock a moment before and saw it was midnight. The moon was still out and still red. What makes it even worse for myself is that my mother also caught a glimpse of them. I turned around shocked, and I felt like if I turned around, they would be flying behind us screaming. I've passed by several times since then, and every time I get a shiver up my spine, remembering what happened that night. I still get teased a bit about it, even to this day, even though my mom was pretty spooked out herself. My dog and I have been traveling the mountains of upstate New York and Pennsylvania for 17 years. So when he left me last February 2007, I brought him to his favorite spot. There was still snow on the ground, and tracking through the woods at this time was very difficult. I tried to break ground with the pick that I carried, but the ground would not permit me. I found a nice spot and laid him under some brush beneath some trees. I told Dylan I would be back. 3 weeks passed before I was able to get back to him. When I was driving up the dirt road, all I could think about was how I was going to find him. Being where I'd laid him down, I thought I'd find him in pieces. Was getting sick to my stomach. He was my boy, and this had to be done. When I reached him, it was just like I had laid him down. Thought this was weird. He wasn't even stiff. It was like he was waiting for me to come back. It was nice being with him, even though he had passed. The rest of the afternoon off and on, I dug his grave, going very deep so the wild animals couldn't dig him up. I took off my coat and wrapped it around him and laid him in the grave. Dusk was setting in, and all of a sudden, I heard children moving all around me, laughing and giggling. I knew this wasn't natural for children to be where we were, for the closest house was at least 10 miles away. I still dismissed this in my mind, as the circle we were using around me kept getting smaller. I would stop every now and then and listen, but I would hear no breaking branches, which should have been happening. Thank God I already had a cross I made, for night was now upon me. When I was tracking up the mountain towards my car, the spirits were in a horseshoe behind me. Every now and then, I would turn around to keep them behind me. This still didn't stop the giggling. Never heard this type of laughter before. When I made the clearing where my car was, the noise finally stopped. I popped the trunk open to put the pick and the shovel in. Then, I leaned over the hood of my car. There stood 5 solid white entities at the edge of the woods. They were not children. For the past 11 months, I've been visiting his graves to make sure his resting place is kept up and comfortable. Once, I saw a dark figure that drifted across the opening. Another time, this figure was floating 7 yards from me. I even heard bullfrogs croaking. I'm an educated man. I'm not crazy. Can't talk to anyone about this without people thinking I'm weird or mentally disturbed. Either way, this was a tale that I thought you'd enjoy. It's 100% real. I swear my life on it. I know I may only have my word, but it's the best I can do. I've worked at St. Francis Hospital in Peoria, Illinois for over 20 years. I've seen some of the nun ghosts on the 7th floor, where the laboratory was when I worked there. The morgue was also on that floor. I was working 3rd shift one night. At times, we took the back elevator, the service elevator, to the floors to draw labs when needed. As I was walking down the hall to the elevator, I saw a nun getting onto the elevator. I yelled out to her, "Please hold the elevator, sister." The door started closing. Thinking she did not hear me, I hit the down button as it closed. The door opened, but there was no one on the elevator. There was nowhere else she could have gone, for it was a dead-end hallway. To take the stairs, she would have had to walk past me. This was a strange night, and it took place many years ago. Another moment, it was fairly late, and I was again on my way to the elevator. This time, I made it inside alone, and as the elevator was closing, I saw a man in a white lab coat standing all the way at the end of the hallway. At the time, the hallway was pretty dark, but there was just enough light that you could see down it. I knew for a fact that there was absolutely no one else on the floor at the time. The image of the man in the lab coat, and also the nun, will always be engraved in my mind. This hospital has always had a reputation for having had ghostly visitations from previous employees who used to work there. Some of my coworkers have experienced this as well. When I was describing what I had seen to a current coworker, she was a bit startled from the revelation. That's because one night, she had taken the elevator to the morgue, and when she got down to it, she could have sworn that she saw a figure or dark shadow in a praying position, kneeled over. She said the figure was an outline of a person. No distinct features, almost cloud-like, but could definitely tell it was made to be some sort of person. My theory is that the nun appeared once again to help with the newly deceased transition to the other side. I'd also like to think that the man in the lab coat was a former employee of this hospital. Either way, there's quite a bit of haunted history here, and I'm not sure how to deal with it at times. Since I'm fairly used to creepy happenings, it no longer frightens me like it used to, but there's always a bit of excitement in telling these tales to those who haven't heard them before. I believe there is a portal to the other side that humans have access to, and eventually we'll transport ourselves to this world. As for now, we're just getting a glimpse of the afterlife. This is an authentic story, and it happened to me. I've already posted this on allaboutghosts.com, but I've not heard anything about this place other than my story. Maybe someone out there has had a similar experience, or even paranormal things happen at this place. What made me want to add my story here is when I read the story about Tacoma Point Defiance Park, 5 Mile Drive. This story grabbed me and was almost disturbing to me because it is so closely related to mine about a little girl. However, this was no ordinary looking girl. She was looking real, of course, except she had no eyes and was smiling, and then all of a sudden she disappeared. I was searching here to see if there was anything from my spot at Eagle Falls. When I went to this favorite swimming hole of mine on the Socoa River. This is a very beautiful swimming hole, almost lagoon-like, where the river flows, with falls into a pool of deep colorful water, and under the water, on the side of the walls, there are huge giant flat rocks that drop off down where you cannot see the bottom. The rocks above have been carved into the star-like settings that have become flat, and then go down into where the river wall is. Across the river, which is only about 50 feet or so, there are rocks where people can climb to. There is a rope swing tied to a tree on this side also. It's a popular spot for people to swim in the summer. I really like this place for swimming and floating on my raft of flippers, so I can move faster to swim up the currents of the falls better and ride the river down. This brings me to my story. I was headed towards the place where I was going to do just that, and noticed there were two people to the right of me, a man and a woman, one sitting next to the rope swing, and the other climbing up the rocks. And to the left of me, there was this little girl, about 6 or 7 years old, and standing about 3 feet away from me, on the edge of the rock by the water with her head turned slightly, and just smiling at me. I am swimming still almost to passing her, and notice she's still smiling, so I smiled. I waved to her and said hi. She still smiles at me, but says nothing back. I looked at her again, this time into her eyes. We locked eyes for a second, and that is when I noticed her eyes were very dark, to the point where I couldn't see her eye color. They only looked like black holes, almost hollow-like. Everything about this girl seemed normal, except for her eyes. She had a cute little swimsuit that was lime green, with little white flowers on it, and a little ruffle around the waist. She was tan, and had golden blonde shiny hair that came down past her shoulders, and also had bare feet. She was alone. There was nobody above her or next to her. I was thinking that maybe she was standing there watching her mother swing from the rope swing, or something, but as I swam a little bit past her, I suddenly turned to look back, because I feared her being too close to the edge, and wanted to let her to know to step back. But as I turned to do this, she was gone. Now, I was wondering how she could climb the rocks that quickly, and how she could be completely out of sight when I only turned for a second, then looked back. Surely I would have noticed her walking away, at least if she did climb the rocks, or even if she had fallen in, I would have heard the sound of water splashing. I was only a few feet away from where she was standing, and I quickly went to the area where I saw her, and nothing. I looked above and further back where some people were sitting by some trees, and looked down along the banks where other people were sitting, and with kids, and no one looked like her, or had blonde golden hair, or the same bathing suit on. At this point of feeling very confused, I felt a cold chill come over me, and my hairs and my arms were standing up. I felt a sadness and chilling feeling, and had a vision of the same girl falling into the water and drowning. I even felt some pain and a little bit of anger type emotions, right there where she stood, while I was still trying to see if I could find her. I thought, where are her parents? Why is she all alone? So I swam back up to my spot by the river and told a friend I was with what happened, and I pointed to the rock she was on. He said it sounded and even looked like I saw a ghost from the way I was acting. I asked him if he would go back with me to look for her, and he said no way, that is way too creepy. I don't want to go over there with you. I'm thinking about how this situation is so crazy, and the fact that it's daylight even. I'm going back to see if I can see her, I said. Determined to find her, I swam back to the spot where it happened, and looked all over the area where people were sitting, and still, no little girl in a green bathing suit. I started looking in the water to see if I could see anything from down there. Nothing. And the girl across the river that I thought was her mother was not. She was with the guy on the rock still. Then again, I get the chill, and I'm feeling sad, and start becoming afraid of the spot, and even swam away from it again, thinking this doesn't make any sense, then wondering if I'm the only one who saw her. Did the people across the river even see her? This is a wide visible area where you can see everyone around you. Am I losing it? Then I remember those eyes she had were actually hollow. The smile she made, and just kept smiling at me. How she didn't even move from the time I swam towards her, stopped, made eye contact, and said hi, then kept swimming, only a few feet further, then turned around to say she was close to the edge, or, where is your mother? Somebody should be with you. I truly believe what I saw was an entity of some sort, and perhaps this little girl might have fell into the river and drowned, right where she was standing. I've heard some stories from here of people dying at the spot by swinging from the rope swings and jumping from the high cliffs, which happened right across from where she was. I also believe I wouldn't be so disturbed by this if it all seemed normal, but it didn't, and for some reason, she didn't seem to fit in. I wrote to ease my mind, and maybe to just get it out somehow. If anything at all, I will probably never know why she picked me to see her, but I will never forget what she looked like, or how she stared at me and smiled for so long. Maybe she was looking out for some people swimming in the river. Who knows? Well, this is the end of my story. Up until I was around 10, my mom, sister, and dad and I lived in a house called Fielder's Green, which was in Lanark, Cornwall. The house must have been around 50 years old, and was originally 2 cottages joined together, meaning it was fairly big. To begin, the only things that would happen would be the odd cold spot, and often I felt like I was being watched. Another time, my mom went to use the downstairs bathroom, leaving my dad in the kitchen, when she heard a man cough loudly outside the door. Thinking it was my dad using the study, she shouted something, only to hear no reply. She left the bathroom. There was no one outside, or even in the study. When she went back to the kitchen, my dad was at the same place. She asked him if he had followed her to the bathroom, which incidentally wasn't near the kitchen, and he said he hadn't moved. There was no one else at the house at the time, apart from me and my sister, and we were in bed. Another thing that happened was when my mom, my dad, and my dad's friend were sat in the kitchen late one night, when they suddenly heard an almighty crash from my bedroom upstairs. My mom said it sounded like a full-grown adult being thrown to the floor. Thinking maybe my wardrobe had toppled over or had fallen out of bed, they ran upstairs and found me fast asleep with nothing out of place. Later on, they even got someone to check the chimney in my room to see if a stone had fallen down it, but they found nothing. To this day, we don't know what the crash was, or indeed who made it. The most unexplained incident, however, was the sound of a singing lady. My mom and dad were asleep in bed, and they were woken by a tuneless humming outside their bedroom door. There was no way it would have been me or my sister, as we were only young, and it was quite clearly the sound of a woman. The sound came along the corridor from my room and gradually disappeared downstairs. Another time, my mom, sister, and I were inside my mom and dad's bedroom, helping my mom fold up some laundry. My dad was outside mowing the lawn, and we could see him from the room. After we had finished, we went to open the bedroom door, which was shut. We couldn't get out. The door had no lock on it and wasn't jammed. There was no draft in the room, as it was an airless summer's day. It felt like someone was standing outside, holding onto the handle to prevent us from leaving. My mom, who was obviously stronger than me and my sister, tried the door too, but there was no lock. In the end, we had to shout outside to my dad to come and let us out. He opened the door easily, and there was no sign of it ever being stuck. We left that house when my parents separated, and I found out from someone that knew the current inhabitants that they too were experiencing strange things, such as their child's toys being turned and turned off during that night. My friends and I went to Cypress Valley Cemetery in Villanova, Arkansas. We come to your site and have tried out some of the places and have gotten good responses. We parked our car out front and went into the gates around 3 in the morning. There were 4 of us. There were 2 guys, and then my best friends and I, who are girls. The guys went in first, and we followed them soon after. Immediately entering, we all had a very strange feeling come over us. My best friend and I decided to go back to the car and let the guys walk around and explore some more. We were alone in the car for nearly 20 minutes with the windows rolled down because we were smoking when we started hearing screams from the distance. They sounded like they were coming from a woman. We saw no one else there. Then a few minutes later, my best friend saw the outline of two men walking on one end of the cemetery. She assumed it was our guys, so she called their cells, which when they answered, the lights from the phone showed us that they were on the complete opposite end. There is no way that they could have made it over there that quick. When we finally decided to leave, they got in the car and we sat for a minute. We had the windows rolled down, but it was about 68 degrees outside, so it wasn't cold at all. We all felt as if the air conditioning was blasting on us, but there was no source of air. It was very strange. Strange things kept happening to us later the next day. We go ghost hunting almost every weekend, and have been to many places, and this one was by far the scariest place. It just felt very uneasy, very dark. Just thought I'd let you know. Here's one of my stories of paranormal activity. From being very young, my brother and I had always experienced things we knew were not normal, but of course, our grandparents, whom we had lived with since we can remember, brushed it off as childish imagination. As we were growing up, we saw less and less unusual happenings. It all began when I was 15 years old. My brother at the time was 17, and our grandfather passed away. My entire family reported seeing him the night after he passed away. Now, my family has its skeptics and its believers, and every one of them reported seeing him laughing and looking much younger and healthier than they'd ever remembered. He smiled at them all and said goodbye. Now, my brother and I had not seen this apparition, so we brushed it off as their subconscious projecting an image they all wanted to see. Of course we were believers, but we thought if anyone would have seen him, it would have been us, for we had been there for him when nobody else had ever been. Well, our thoughts came to reality one night, around 5 months after his passing, and this supposed collective haunting. My brother and I were up in his room playing on the PC. My grandmother was out, and my little sister in bed. Now my grandfather, or Daddy, as was his nickname, always enjoyed his music and always had it on extremely loud. We were laughing at something on the internet when John Lennon, Imagine, began playing very loudly downstairs. Well, at first, we thought it was a cruel joke by our neighbors. This particular song had been his first choice for his cremation, and so I, being the braver of us, stormed downstairs to find it was indeed coming from the office room that was my grandfather's. I walked into his old room to find it was freezing, and there were no windows or doors open, and the CD player was not on, and the music was still going. Then, there was a knock on the back door. Usually our neighbors used our back door, and the music stopped. My brother was now downstairs with me, and we thought it must have been our neighbors there to complain, and the noise, so he unblocked and opened the door. Opposite the door was an outside toilet, and as my brother opened the door, he froze. His face paled, and I could tell there was something wrong. I looked outside to see nothing, but incredibly shaken by the music, I slammed and locked the door, turned every light on in the house, bar my sister's, as she was seemingly sound asleep and sat downstairs waiting for my grandmother. To this day, my brother will not tell me what he saw outside, but I doubt it was the friendly spirit of my grandfather coming to say goodbye. The reason I believe this is because the morning after, my little sister said, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I didn't react and merely asked why. She then replied that the night before Daddy had been in her room when she was crying about his passing, telling her to shush, that everything was okay and he was happy. Also, my neighbors, who were really quick to complain, never mentioned any loud music coming from our house. So I really want to know why only us heard this music, and more importantly, who had been outside when my brother had opened the door. There is a two-story house right in the center of town that I lived in 1958 or 1959. It is known as the Old Van Delzum House. Both my cousin and I experienced odd things in that house. There were many times that we would hear footsteps, such as a man wearing boots walking from the upstairs front bedroom towards the back bedroom to the left of the stairs. My cousin also said that she saw an old apparition in the backyard. I went to see the psychic Carol Pete this week and showed her a picture of the house. She said she felt it was a soldier from the Civil War era. Also, she said that many horrible things happened on the property. No one ever died in the house, so it is connected with the land it sits on. We stayed there only about 2 or 3 months and moved to another location in the same town. I also found out that I am a psychic medium, have had many unexplained things happen through the years. This soldier is not threatening. He does not know he is dead. Wish the house was mine so I could try to help him. All this has been burned in my memory for nearly 50 years. Hey phantoms and possibly new phantoms that want to join along. Please take a moment to share this video, like it, and subscribe if you are new. We have a lot of unheard ghost stories that we like to bring on this channel, so if you're into that, go ahead. You won't be disappointed. I always try my best to get the unheard stories to you guys, and yeah, that's it. And I've been actually uploading pretty much every day for the first few days of October, so I'm definitely intending on recording even more stories for you guys and releasing them, so please give me a big fat like, show your support, do everything you can. I love you guys. Let me know in the comment section how you're doing. Just, keep the comment section alive. I'll always talk to you guys, and if you guys want this video, you can have it to, if you're driving, if you're going to sleep, you just want to relax. These are for the people who like the long compilations of videos. So if you haven't gotten caught up with the latest material, I did actually help you guys by adding some of the material in here. So guys, love you, and I'll see you in the next video.